tends to be more based on people power, but CBD often requires like the whole population to resist as one, and so they haven't focused on people power there. Adriana? Exactly. This is the way that nonviolence can respond to the biggest, most destructive, and most highly organized and most enduring form of violent conflict, which is armed conflict or war. So here's our answer. It comes in these two forms. What's the difference between CPNI and CBD? Can you tell which one you're dealing with? I'd like you guys to be so intimately familiar with this that if your roommate wakes you up in the middle of the night, you'll be able to answer. Amy and then Matthias. Yeah, like duh. All right. Yes, CBD is a do-it-yourself method, and TPNI is do it for other people. That's basically the difference. CBD typically is deployed probably about 6 cases in all of human history, but typically deployed in advance of an attack, a wholesale attack on a country, whereas third-party nonviolent intervention could be almost at any stage of the development of a conflict. Matthias, did you want to add something? Okay. Yeah, the classic example of CBD is Prague Spring. Yeah, the whole society have to do it. If small, isolated groups of individuals decide to resist an armed invasion, they will typically just be, what's the term we use? They'll be taken out. They'll just be killed. But when you have a whole population, say, in Prague what happened was they would declare a curfew. Say 8 o'clock, everybody off the streets. At 8 o'clock, every door in Prague would open up. And these are beautiful doors, by the way, if you've ever seen Prague. Or seen a poster, the doors of Prague. And Prague actually means doorway. I just found that out last weekend, so I thought I would share that with you. Every door in this town would fly open and everybody would be out on the streets. Now, obviously, you can defy a curfew if you're just an isolated person, but you're very likely to get yourself killed that way. Women have been doing it in Palestine. They've been going out saying, this is my time to do my shopping, and I don't care what the IDF says to go out and do it. And usually they have been joined by other people. But CBD does depend more or less on the whole population saying, no, we don't accept this thing, therefore it doesn't exist. So you're talking about state power and threat power, okay? If we don't obey you, you don't have any state power over us. If we aren't scared of your threats, your threat power doesn't work. So that's how you knock that out. So there was another thing I want to say about TPNI and the way you were responding to it, and that is that this is typical for a lot of our terms, is if you're not familiar with them, or you're just getting familiar with them, you tend to use them in way too general a way. And that is going to make it, we're going to lose focus that way, and we won't know what we're talking about. So let's confine TPNI. I mean, this is one of the reasons we gave it an acronym, right? So it could be a specific focus thing that we're talking about. As a deliberate intervention by a third party, distinctly a third party from outside the area, the regime, the culture, in order to, in some way, break up the conflict process and create a space for dialogue and peace. Therefore, I would not say, as some of you did, and I don't think I took off a point for this because we hadn't quite discussed it, I would not say that Hildegard Gelsmeyer's presence in Manila in the mid-'80s was an example of third-party nonviolent intervention. She was a third party, to be sure. She was very helpful, but I'm trying to get my hands on what exactly is different here. First of all, she wasn't a group. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I like that, John. What I was going to say is that she wasn't really a third party. She did not attempt to negotiate anything between Marcos and the Philippine people. She was there for the Philippine people. That probably is the very best way to look at it, look at the difference. But the other thing that I was going to say, which is not nearly as exciting, is that she confined herself to encouragement and education, which TPNI, that's almost the last thing they get around to. They try to do direct interventions of one kind or another. Like this classic thing that happened in Sri Lanka about a year and a half ago where some children had been abducted to be made into soldiers by a faction of the Tamil Tigers. The mothers of those children and those boys knew exactly where they were and wanted to go get them, but they were afraid. So they called on our team, and I think 2 of our people went and accompanied those mothers to the Tamil Tiger camp and then just stood outside the door and let the mothers go in and do the negotiating. So they did not act as mediators. They acted as protectors, witnesses. At the end of the day, literally, the Tigers came out with those mothers, gave them back their children, and gave them their bus fare to go back to town. So that is an interaction that could not have happened without the intervention of a third party. The potential for TPNI is that if you build it up on a larger scale, that's what David Hartsough was telling us about, that it could really become a visible substitute for the war system. Okay, so let's keep that in focus. Then the next one is radical pacifism. The reason that I wanted us to learn something about this movement is that it was a transition from the days of political radicalism to the days of nonviolent resistance. So up until roughly World War II, the struggle, it's the same struggle, but it's getting reconceptualized. The struggle was conceptualized as basically a class struggle, which meant basically a labor struggle, which meant basically if you wanted to be progressive, you would seriously consider joining the Communist Party. And unless you found out what Stalin was doing in the Soviet Union, you might well have a very idealistic commitment to communism or anarchism or something like that. Now, my way of looking at it is that it was not nearly revolutionary enough because it was still accepting materialism and still accepting violence. So really, it wasn't going to get us enough. Not get us far enough. Radical pacifism begins to refocus on different kinds of victimization. And it looks at ethnic minorities, intolerance, and things like that, and begins to discover nonviolent resistance as a tactic. And that leads us up to the future. So what you wanted to say about radical pacifism was that it grew out of the World War II conscientious objector phenomenon, but a lot of you just stopped there. But if you remember, you had that one page in your reader which I drew your attention to, which kind of lays out very succinctly what were the characteristics of radical pacifism and how it was a transition from the old Marxist class struggle days to whatever it is we're trying to do today. Save the Oaks or whatever it may be. Okay. Now we move on to Otpor, and I have to apologize. I got carried away. There was effervescence of the individual happened, and I gave it an exclamation point just because I was so enthusiastic. But technically, it does not have an exclamation point. I didn't take off any credits for this. Earth First is the only organization that actually has an exclamation point as part of its title, to my knowledge. There was only one thing that a lot of you failed to mention about Otpor, and again, it's the thing that is most characteristic, is almost qualitatively different about it. And that is that it was the only example of a nonviolent movement being funded by the United States government. The revolution of 1776 was not nonviolent, though people have argued that there was a nonviolent movement going on. If they had let it go, we would have had a much more bloodless, much more efficient, and much better revolution. But be that as it may, this Otpor was supported by outside intervention, which focused on training and education. So this was rare. On a large scale, you had a huge social uprising, which was supported by educational materials coming directly from the Center for Study of Nonviolence Sanctions in Conflict and Defense at Harvard, the Gene Shaw people. So that's the input. The output side is that after the revolution succeeded, they parlayed that into this organization, Council for Nonviolent Action and something like CANVAS, forget exactly what it stands for. But what they've done is try to package the experience of the Otpor students and make it available to other revolutions. It has been very successful. There's about 8 other uprisings that have happened that probably either would not have happened or would not have been nearly as successful without that input. So I keep jumping up and down and making a big fuss about this. I know that it's much more appealing to talk about action and things like that, but I want action to work, darn it. I want it to be effective and efficient, and that's where the power of thinking and conceptualization comes in. That's the part that we have done least well at. And well, look at this phenomenon, for example. We're experiencing this neoconservative movement, and where did it come from? Well, partly it came from the fact that foundations, so you would think, this is a result of a very interesting study, you would think that progressive foundations have a lot less money than conservative or reactionary foundations. That turns out to be only partly true. Actually, there's a pretty decent amount of money out there for good causes, even if you're not counting George Soros and Bill Gates working on HIV in Africa and so forth. There's a decent amount of money. But for some reason, and it has to do with culture, I believe, the people who were funding progressive causes were very timid about it. And they never funded anybody more than 3 years, which means that you didn't get a chance to develop anything. They never funded infrastructure, which is what we needed most. And as a friend of mine who was a funder, I went to her one day and said, Susan, I have a great idea. And she said, we do not fund ideas. So what do they fund? Everything that I don't need. So while all this is going on the progressive side, conservatives were focusing their support on key individuals with good ideas and maintaining that support as long as it took to get those ideas into practice. So the result of that is you have this network of right-wing think tanks, and they're able to come up with a concerted strategy, and the rest is this dismal situation that we happen to be suffering through right now. Whereas in the progressive world, we say, oh, we already know what we need. There's no need to discuss it. Certainly no need to talk it over with anybody else because they're way too stupid. And what do we need a think tank for? And as a result, we don't have a strategy. We don't have a plan. All we've got is George Lakoff, which, is pretty good, but it may not be quite enough. So that's my excuse for constantly fussing so much about the component of the social change that's trying to happen, which deals with how we understand and think about and interpret and discuss our ideas. Okay. Anything I've said so far that's particularly annoying? Do you think we should? Anything else? Okay. The last remaining item is not an item, but a person is Hildegard Gossmeier. She's an example, again, of continuity. Will you guys figure out who owns which of those 2 laptops? Okay. That's okay, John. I understand. I have technical problems myself. I know how that is. It's good to, some of you, when you were talking about Hildegard Gossmeier, you went immediately to the People's Power Revolution and just talked about that. That was only part of her career. And you should know that she's a very good writer and that she's still at work, that she's an honorary president of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, that she also worked in Guatemala. And she's like a roving trainer ambassador. Up until recently, it's been a very small group of people who've been playing that role. She's been one of the most prominent ones. All right. So I want to say a little bit then about the essays, and then we can move on to have a look at this video, I hope. If you wrote about restorative justice, you might have seen the following cryptic, or you may see this written at the end of your essay. Okay. So, what is NZ? This is not a trick question. It's New Zealand, and why is it here in connection with restorative justice?
It's a model for work programs.
Yeah. Right. It is a model of taking indigenous formats for restorative justice and incorporating them into a modern state. So New Zealand is way ahead in this regard. I'm not. Does anybody know about? Oh, okay. Probably, yeah. There's a lot of cool things about New Zealand, not the least of which is the scenery. If any of you saw The Whale Rider, that is a wonderful movie. I'd really strongly recommend that. That's the interface between ancient and modern New Zealand. It didn't talk much about restorative justice in that movie, mostly about whacking people with sticks and riding around on whales. But New Zealand is one example among many. In my book, I talked about Navajo examples that have been brought in. And there's an interesting parallel here in Navajo medicine. If you're riding a horse on a Navajo reservation and you are a dude and can't stay on your mount and fall off and break your leg, they will immediately take you to a Western hospital to get your leg set because they do not have X-ray machines on the reservation and they don't know how to do that. But as soon as you get your leg taken care of, they'll bring you back to the medicine man and they'll start working on you to take care of the trauma that you experience in your mind and body when this thing happened to you. That the Western doctors are absolutely clueless about that. Even mentioning it is enough to get you thrown out of medical school. So this is very typical of a big fact about our contemporary world, and that is that we need each other. We need indigenous wisdom and modern inventiveness. And so similarly in restorative justice, bringing indigenous methods in and articulating them with the needs of a modern industrial society is a very good move. Now VORP, this wasn't in anything I said in lecture, but it is in my book. It stands for Victim Offender Reconciliation Program. And that's that kind of format where you bring the victim and the offender together with some sort of mediation, and you work out a system where they can feel good about one another. Oh, that's too bad. I have an article on restorative justice, and I left it in my office, and I'm not going to send Amy running all the way up to Stevens Hall to get it at this point. It's a nice article. I'll bring it in after spring break and read you a few things about it. One of the things that this writer said is that the retributive justice, the worst thing that it does is it isolates both the victim and the offender from the internal impact of their experience. It turns it into an abstract thing. Don't worry, the state will take care of you. We'll distribute punishment, and there will be justice. It has really almost nothing to do with your feelings. Now, we keep constantly trying to pretend and deny that this isn't the case. And every time we execute someone, we bring the family of the victim, and the journalist goes around to this family and waits until you get somebody who says, "Oh, thank you. I feel so much better. This is closure. You know, when I saw the smoke coming out of his ears, I really felt it at last." You know, but this is absolute nonsense. This is not how human beings react at all. But the journalists playing their role in sustaining the culture, true or false, mostly false, are constantly iterating this every time there's an execution, because this is part of trying to convince us that retributive justice works. But it does not work. It isolates the individual from his or her own experiences. So restorative justice goes right back to that level and says, this is the key thing. Let's fix it for the victim and for the offender. And another program that works within restorative justice is called the Alternatives to Violence Project. Mostly a Quaker-based program, goes into prisons. And one of the simple things it does is it takes convicts and teaches them how to talk about their issues, so they can solve it on the level of talking without, pulling a knife on one another. And in other ways too, it tries to give them some self-esteem. There's our dignity thing again. And once again, it's completely non-governmental, but here and there, more progressive criminal justice units have taken to adopting some of these things into the prison because they see how well it works. And incidentally, our very own state, California, tried to do this. Took this prison warden, Joanne Woodruff, I think her name was, who was an incredible human being, was always thinking about the inmates as people, had an amazing record in terms of the people that she released did not come back to prison. And none other than Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger picked up on this, and he appointed her to be the head of the Justice Department of California, in which position she lasted for about 3.5 weeks, because the prison guard union is so immensely powerful that nobody at this point can function in that whole system. So that just gives you an example of some of the problems we're up against in instituting this. And again, it shows that restorative justice has been pretty much a constructive program operation without obstructive program elements. Okay, I have only one other supplement to make here. That is, those of you who discussed Larzac, that campaign, and quite a few of you did for obvious reasons, important to mention the power of the community. It's what the community does, and I myself didn't realize this until just now. What the community does, therefore, you were not you were not responsible for it, but I'm kind of thrilled, so I'm going to share it with you. Okay, nonviolence up to now has been mostly an idea which shows up in occasional episodes, but that doesn't give it much solidity for most of us who are pretty much anchored in the material world. If you take this idea of nonviolence and make it into a community, that gives it much more local habitation and a name, as we say in English poetry. It reifies it. It makes it a thing. So I mentioned several strategic advantages of the communities that Gandhi founded in India, that they were like refuges, they were mostly training centers, and they were places where you could experiment with a new economy and a new way of living. But I think the most important aspect of community, like the community of the Ark, is that it shows you could build a whole world based on nonviolence. We're doing it right here on our small scale. This is what monasteries were in the Middle Ages. They created another world based on a different energy, and they showed you that another world was possible. Okay? So I don't mean to give you the impression that your exams were very weak. Actually, they were quite good. And let me just again remind you that if they were very, very good, you're probably in trouble. If they were very bad, you're also in trouble. In the latter case, come and talk to me. But otherwise, they were pretty good. So let's now, have we got? Yeah. Okay. Let's see now if we're going to get this thing to work. Okay. Well, there's something. Well, that's your notes for your exam. I hope you didn't carry that with you into the. Casey, would you get the lights for us, please? There we go. Judy Barry and her partner were driving in a car, and there was a bomb in the car. Within 5 minutes, the FBI came around and arrested her for having bombed herself, and it was horrendous, and it looked like a very good case was actually developing against the FBI. Unfortunately, Judy, possibly partly as a result of complications of this attack, she developed cancer, and she died shortly thereafter. But just before the Oakland police and the FBI were going to be brought to court and publicly accused of counterterrorism for having bombed her. But that's a very unfortunate outcome. Wasn't the part of the film that I mainly wanted to focus on. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 comments, and then I want to stop so you can have time to pick up your exams. Anything that I hope you were able to hear that, by the way. I don't know why the sound wasn't that good. Let's. Oh, yeah, this is a contraband DVD, so maybe. So, anybody want to just comment on this from any aspect at all? What stood out for you? Sam? Well, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I do know that it's far from over. It's still going on. But I think Mr. Hurwitz, the junk bond king who moved in and milked the remaining redwood